Wealth, Poverty, and Social Class, a presentation on the wealth gap by Irina Bruick. How does the wealth gap affect American society? And despite the efforts and practices to limit the 1%'s accumulation of wealth, the wealth gap is still prevalent and affecting 99% of American society left over. How does the wealth gap affect American society? Did you know that in 1961, the top 1% made 125 times the income of the median household? That means if a household made $5,000-$6,000, the top 1% would make $625,000 to $800,000, which is about $5 to $6 million in today's money. Who is the one? The 1% are billionaires of the U.S. Think Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk. Who's the 99? We are. The middle and lower classes make up the 99%. Social mobility is the idea of moving up within social classes. Better known as the caste system, this became the foundation of Indian society and one of the most rigidly hierarchical class structures. Much like the U.S. class system, the Law Code of Manu prohibited minimal social mobility. Despite the efforts and practices to limit the 1%'s accumulation of wealth, the wealth gap is still prevalent and affecting 99% of Americans left over. What are our efforts? It is true that over the years, and those in the top tax bracket are taxed more. The rate at which they are taxed has increased over the recent years in attempts to bridge this gap. However, an interesting observation can be made in 1961. Those who made $400,000 jointly were at a 91% rate, compared to those who made $40,000 who are at a 56% rate, who only made $18,000 more despite making 10 times more money. Why isn't this working? Because although it provides somewhat of a solution, it can lead to market stagnation and a decline in investments. What is rent seeking and how has it exponentially increased the wealth gap? Why is something so immoral grown exponentially? Extraction versus creation. Opposed to the creation of wealth and innovation, the financiers and the 1% are seeking to exploit and gain it from supporting and receiving support from political influencers by capitalizing off those who have created wealth before. For example, Jeffrey Bezos created an online dominating market called Amazon, which was stemmed off of the World Wide Web created by Tim Berners-Lee. Although Jeff Bezos is now a billionaire, Tim Berners-Lee didn't make any original profit off the World Wide Web. Rent seeking. However, seeking is more describing subsidies or monopoly profits. This is popular with countries that profit off natural resources, but now is a business tactic to exploit American society. To put it baldly, there are two ways to become wealthy: to create wealth or to take wealth away from others. How can we examine factors like race or gender influencing the gap? The flower market. Depicted in the poem, The Flower Market, there is an analogy we can draw and compare to American socioeconomics. Chu Yi, the poet-illustrator, illustrates a farmer passing by the flower market and sighing of the realization that a cluster of deep red flowers would pay the taxes of 10 poor houses. Although sourcing from 800, the poem is very similar and describes the quality of living in the lower and middle classes as a result of the wage gap. This increases the likelihood of poverty because no longer is the upper class generating wealth, but extracting it. Poverty. And according to the 2020 census, poverty rate has proved to be increasing and up by 1% since 2019. Not only that, but you can see a correlation between the racial wage gap and the majority of people in poverty being people of color. How race and gender affect your wages. In the first graph, you can see that people of color are the majority of people in 2019 and 2020 who are in poverty. You can see on this graph here, compared to the average white male's wage, the only person making above that is the Asian male. Every other person of color and white women made less than the white man's wage, which can show the racial and gender wage gap. further increasing the wealth gap. Let's get a visual.
1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by.
Let's review. 50% of all stocks and bonds and mutual funds belong to the 1%. 40% of the national wealth belongs to the 1%. And 24% of income goes to the 1%. Whether it's charity, a better breakdown of taxes, or re-examining socialism, the wealth gap needs to be bridged. So what now? We've examined how and why the wealth gap has grown. Now we must synthesize a moral, generous, but honest approach to bridging the gap. Charity. I believe that by raising taxes by 13%, having a 50% max, and having the 1% donate 10 to 20% of their annual income to nonprofit organizations, we can minimize the wealth gap while improving American society. Although we've already raised our taxes and it would be quite politically controversial, the impact on society would improve the quality of life and our socioeconomic status as a country. Thank you so much.